check it out. Anyway.
Okay, now to the main event.
The show, yeah.
Yeah, the main event. And I've got my grandpa here. You guys know him as Phil Shulman of Gentle Giant. And basically what we're going to do, Grandpa, yeah?
Yeah, go on.
I'll tell you what, El, do you want me to just move the mic into you a little bit?
Okay. What we're going to do is, like, you're going to tell us about your musical sort of background, your history. Yeah, okay, so why don't we start, you know, how did it begin? When did you, what was your, like, early influences on music?
Well, come to think of it, it's probably started with my mother. I think my earliest musical memories, I only found out they were musical, by the way, much later in life, because I think she was trying to sing us to sleep. And in fact, I thought she just spoke with a very up and down sort of way. And I thought, that's bloody weird. And it kept me awake thinking about it, I think. I was about 2 then. But my really earliest influences in the musical field, I suppose, was through my dad, who had been just before the war a fairly well-known trumpet player in Glasgow. That's Scotland, folks, unless you wonder where it is, not Fratton. And he had played in bands like Sammy Miller's band in Glasgow and Harry Margollis's band, which were well-known bands. But at the outbreak of war, he jacked it all in, joined up, came down to Pompey, where that was the actual first night of his joining up with my uncle, and actually fell in love with the city, believe it or not, although it's impossible to believe, really, when you think about Pompey. Still, there you go. Anyway, I didn't really get into anything other than silly kid stuff until my father came home from the war, as it were, and I suppose he really introduced me to the first basic things were through the early bebop records, which he had brought back with him, and even at the age of, I suppose, 8 or 9, I was sort of getting into that kind of thing.
So what kind of artist would that have been?
Kind of artists? Well, obviously the first ones, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, yeah. People like Bud Powell and Thelonious Monk, Max Roach. Oh, it's good people. But even as a kid, I like the rhythmic, the whole thing, you know. Also, I suppose, through films that I'd seen, because there was a lot of these... Apologies. Right. There was a lot of these films being made from Hollywood, which included bands, and certain things occurred in the films that I quite enjoyed. You know, people like Bob Crosby's Bobcats had people like Bobby Haggard and Ray Bowduck playing. I've been telling my grandchildren about these. Big Noise from Winnetka and things like that. And Gene Krupa, he was an absolute hero. He was a drummer with Benny Goodman's band and formed his own band eventually. But he was like a cat's arse, I was going to say, more like a cat's whiskers.
That's right. You're free to swear on this.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
You're all right.
Yeah, Gene Krupa was my first, I suppose, real musical hero. Then, of course, it was Free for All. My dad had come back. He was playing fairly regularly in Glasgow when he came back, but then he got a chance of a job down in Pompey with a band called Jimmy Harris's band, Kimball's Ballroom, which was in Osborne Road at the time.
Yeah.
And down we came, lock, stock and whatever else we had.
What was the reason for the move? Literally
it was part of the reason, but it's also part of the fact that we were living in the Gorbals of Glasgow, and between you and I suppose downtown Baghdad would have been better. But Pompey was fresh and clean compared to the middle of Glasgow and its nasty tenement rat-filled buildings, you know.
Sure, yeah.
Anyway, go on. What else do you want to hear about from your grandpa?
Well, really, I mean, yeah.
Your dad.
Sort of from there, really. I mean, at what point, I guess, did you really pick up an instrument?
Well, in fairness, there was always kinds of instruments in the house. My dad always had either an old trumpet which he'd discarded, or there was a valve trombone lying around, I remember. Also, I'm trying to think what other things he'd left. There's things lying around, and not just me, but my brothers, when they came along, that was their first grab as well. They would get hold of an instrument and in some way try to play it. The old man more or less taught us how to blow, all of us basically, how to blow through a trumpet, I guess, because that was his instrument. And I suppose I pottered about, but mainly, believe it or not, I enjoyed singing in the school choir, because eventually I got through to Portsmouth Grammar School, and they had a fairly vigorous choral society, and things like Handel's Messiah. Haydn's Requiem, Bach's Mass in B minor. I remember singing in all those things. And
you did all that?
yeah, and they were, believe it or not, very exciting things to be in.
Yeah.
But as far as pop music was concerned and things like that, I really wasn't a great early pop fan.
What kind of era were we talking about?
Well, no, we're talking about 50s now,
Yeah.
and between you and me, I thought it was a bit bloody ragged, quite frankly.
Yeah. What, like
Well, the first Elvis Presley, but worst of all in this country were things like skiffle bands and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
When
Lonnie Donegan.
before that, even, I mean, people playing with Chas McDevitt. People like that, you know, and
I don't know.
exactly. No. I mean, you don't really want to, but I mean, people were playing. They called it a bass. Was a tea chest, a bit of string, and a pole.
Yeah.
And I don't mean a pole from Poland. I mean actually a pole from a broom.
Yeah.
And that was the guitar. That was the bass rather. A washboard for rhythm keeping, and some guy who'd he couldn't sing in tune because there was nothing to tune to, basically. But there was a lot of mucky stuff about at the time, you know. And of course, the big thing of the 50s was trad jazz, and I thought that was a bit tawdry as well, between you and me.
Yeah, a little bit stiff, really.
But go on.
Yeah.
Go on, what were we saying now?
Yeah, jump in if you want. Go on.
Well, what do you want to go on to?
Well, just really on a flow, really. I'm kind of happy, sort of like hearing some of this stuff is new to me.
Yeah, I know.
Well, there you go.
Did you ever speak to me in my childhood?
Yeah.
Well, but you should know. you were always with me. Go on.
But like from there, I mean, I suppose it. So what was the kind of development of your musical development?
Yeah.
So you're singing at school. You're picking up the odd instrument. How influential was, say, your dad? Because I mean, unfortunately, I never met.
No, he became truly influential when I was about, I suppose, 15, 16. Although before then, he'd had a regular gig playing every night of the week with Wally Fry and his band at the South Parade Pier Ballroom, and he played also with Benny Friedman and his band at Savoy eventually.
That's quite big.
Big deal, isn't it? But not just big. The big deal was that name bands came down at least once a week to Pompey. People, I remember seeing Johnny Dankworth 7 with Cleo Lane singing her second gig ever.
Yeah.
A little spotty girl with frizzy hair, but even then with huge talent, you know. But I was about, I think, 11 or 12 then, and he let me come in sit at the side of the stage and see these people. And of course, it was also very much in the vein of what I really enjoyed earlier than that. They were playing bop and what was called then, in inverted commas, modern jazz. Yeah. But it was jazz to me, jazz that I liked, and I still remember the names of the bands.
So like you were actually watching your father play.
Oh yeah, I watched him play on stage.
That kind of like,
quite influential. It's pleasant to see, for instance, people enjoying themselves to music and with music. It's pleasant to see musicians enjoying themselves giving music. That in itself is quite an attractive thing to witness, you know, getting applauded for something which you enjoy doing. And, of course, giving people a bit of a treat, you know, and getting paid for it, of course.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk about that kind of stuff forever, but, you know.
Yeah. There's so many
so we
artists.
Move on.
Yeah.
When you started playing,
no,
do you want to take over, Al? When you started playing, what about like so you move on into a world of like, you get the 1960s.
Yeah, well,
you got Ray and Derek.
My younger brothers by then had a kind of not grown up, but had become aware themselves of what they wanted to do and what they were enjoying doing, and it was more of a hobby to begin with. Although Ray had very early training on the fiddle. And another brother, Terry, he played trumpet in the school band, etc., in more brass band sort of music. But Ray was a fiddle player to begin with. People who know Pompey would know Sammy Coates, who taught a lot of kids early on. And
he taught me.
I think he did for a bit. That's right, he did.
He was about 150 at the time.
At the time, yeah. I mean,
he used to Mary Hill.
Well, I thought you had to hold him up, didn't you, at the times? Yeah.
I don't know. I just used to.
I don't think he was a drinker, but you know. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, exactly, Damon. He taught you the first rudiments of fiddle playing, as he said. But Ray was a fiddle player. Derek was what I'll call the first one who saw the potential. And I put it in inverted commas of what it's like to be a star. He was crazy for the bands that were coming along. He was about 16 when the sort of Mersey sounds were starting, and he and his mates at school, he was at Southern Grammar, they started little things themselves without Ray, of course, because Ray was starting at junior school when all this was starting. Then when Ray went to the tech school, his musical mentor was a bloke called Reg Wassell, who was known in the not just Portsmouth circles, but South generally, as a quite influential music maker himself. I think he was a cellist, and he saw great things for Ray eventually. But as I say, Ray was more in serious violin player. But of course, Ray too was at the same time listening to his older brother Derek. And by then, of course, I think I was probably married by then. I got married at 21.
But was Ray?
What?
I don't know if this is
pertinent.
No, was Ray sort of like on the verge of sort of like studying music?
Oh, definitely. Ray was. Destined definitely for one of the musical colleges, and when in fact eventually what happened, I think not just common knowledge, but he was obviously part of Simon Dupri and Gentle Giant. It wasn't a great disappointment to Reg Wassell, but he was most surprised that Ray hadn't pursued it. One of his
that's kind of obvious that
but one of his mates, who was also at the tech school, I think it was called Baczynski, he became not just a good violin player, but he was, I think, lead violinist with something like the Cape Town Symphony, and got
Ray.
No, his mate,
right.
Baczynski, who was also taught by Reg Wassell, etc., in Pompey. But Derek, as I said, he got his mates band together, doing the bits and pieces. But there was a huge crisis in the whole family's life when my father died at the age of 50. Literally the next morning after a fairly strenuous gig, and he died, leaving the boys without, at a time when they probably needed it, without a dad really to direct them, and not willingly, but I suppose almost naturally, because my next one down from me is Derek, and he's 10 years younger than me. They kind of turned. Well, they weren't forced on me, but.
I mean, the situation.
Yeah, your mum and I were living by then next door to them in Eastney Road.
Yeah.
And it was almost, I suppose, forced upon me to take an interest in what they were doing, basically. Derek had done his O-levels. Ray was just about doing his O-levels. I was teaching by then. I was teaching literally round the corner from where we lived. I taught at Eastney Modern School, and I was living in Eastney Road. Right. So work it out. Why do you think I did that, folks? Very handy. No bus fares, late starts, early home, fairly long holidays, crap pay, but compensated for by lots of other things. Yeah,
that's great.
So I mean, it's a horrible situation, but so. How did that develop?
Well, it developed in that my brothers actually got a band together. Now, if you saw now what they were playing through and with, it looks like something which I don't suppose even Ricky Gervais would be proud of, because it was more than a nonsense. It was like the Ritz brother in Hell's a Poppin'. I mean. It was like they were playing. Ray built himself. I'll never forget it. He built himself. He'd been told by somebody that if you had a very stable speaker in a bass, because he was playing bass, by the way, by then, a very stable speaker in a large cabinet, stability meant to him a concrete fucking block in the bottom of the speaker, which in fact it took most of the band to pick up. Yeah. Forget about moving it anywhere, but that was incredible. And then they also played through the column speakers, the vocals was done through things called linear amps. Anybody who's played in a band in the early 60s will remember what linear amps were like. I mean, if you didn't get a belt from them, a shock, you didn't have a linear amp. But they were bought mainly from a little electrical shop in Lake Road in Pompey, which was quite funny because everybody was there. Go on.
I was just going to say, knowing the dangers of that, many years later, the first amp you bought me was a linear.
It would be. Yeah, you were my son. You had to learn. Yeah. You had to learn the hard way.
All right.
But anyway.
So they formed a band.
Yeah, and they were playing music, which I suppose, funnily enough, my own grandsons, it's Elliot and Rowan, who are both here.
Yeah, we have to introduce Rowan Shulman.
Rowan.
Who's here.
Shout hello.
Say hello.
Yeah, both of them have got into the blues recently, although they've been through all the usual indie and what have you guff. They're into the blues, and this is what my brother started with. People like Howlin' Wolf and what was I going to say, Wee Willie Dixon and people like that, and they were deeply into that and wanted to be what you call, because that was the thing, is to be groovy, be a blues band, and
That's great.
the band were, well, to say the least, basic.
White boys playing the blues.
White boys, not just white boys playing the blues. They tried very hard to get coloured by not washing themselves and things like that, you know, getting dirty, you know.
Yeah.
But
Nothing changes.
No, nothing changes. You got it. But I sort of encouraged it from afar.
Yeah.
Until they approached me to say, "Look, Phil, you're a teacher." Right, you know, people have got youth clubs and that, because that was the thing, by the way. Most bands started off getting their first gigs almost certainly through youth clubs, and most secondary schools, and there were quite a few secondary modern schools in Pompey then, say 20 to 30, not like secondary comprehensives, which are huge things, but they all had their youth clubs, which meant there was always a gig somewhere.
Yeah.
So the first thing, of course, my brother said, "Could you get us a van?" The van.
Get us a van.
Well, the van was ultimately important. Doesn't matter what was in it.
Yeah.
But if you turned up in a van rather than people like on bikes or in the back of your dad's car or something like that, but you had a van, you were a proper group.
I was going to say, but that's quite demanding. I would have thought in the mid '60s that would be quite.
No.
Van.
This took out. It did actually take my wife Bobby and I's entire savings, which was 35 quid.
Yeah.
That van, a Dormobile.
Yeah.
It was called a Dormobile, folks, with sliding doors. And believe me, the doors were supposed to stop when you opened them sliding, but often they came straight off the rollers. In fact, I've seen people actually sliding down the road on the doors.
Is this like a famous story of one of your?
Oh yeah,
roadies?
Darryl, one of Derek's schoolmates, actually copped hold of the door while we were moving, and it came straight off. And the last we saw him was literally skiing down. He was like not skiing; he was like sledging down the road on this door. But I bought the van, and my brother started actually playing properly. But we had to get a band together properly too. So there was lots of amusing situations where they got the first band.
Were you at that stage? Were you actually sort of like the manager?
I was definitely the manager,
Right.
and they were definitely rehearsing in my classroom
Right.
at school, which was also a bonus and benefit because we could literally carry the stuff around the corner to begin with.
Yeah.
And the first bands, though, were pretty horrifying. I mean, they had schoolmates, and they're not essentially the best musicians you
Okay.
give. Well, it wasn't that. Not as good as my brothers wanted them to be, or as good as my brothers, quite frankly. So that was.
Were they pretty good?
No.
Early on, I mean Derek and Ray.
Derek and Ray were good. They just had.
what-
It's a silly thing to say about your family and that, but I think all the family, I'm going to say it. All my family is what is called got an ear.
Yeah.
Now, when you've got an ear, it doesn't have help to play a musical instrument. That means you can actually hear how the thing should sound, and you can usually pitch the instrument itself properly, and you knew about how songs were constructed just by literally listening rather than studying.
Yeah.
And my brothers were pretty sharp at that, and Ray had actually a good musical background, very good one indeed. Anyway, go on. What do you want to know about that then? From then on?
Well,
Yeah.
really. Yeah, I mean,
Wanna, like,
the
take-
whole history.
Right, the whole history. Well, here we go then.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, you know,
So we
cut it down.
got a van,
Yeah.
but we haven't really got a proper band. The basis of the band were three people, and that was Derek, who was a vocalist and kind of played a guitar, but not really. Ray, who played guitar and bass.
Yeah.
And if you wanted him to, fiddle.
Yeah.
But and another mate called Eric Hine, who'd been Derek's friend through Southern Grammar for a long. He was a reasonable keyboard player, Eric.
Right. So I interject here.
Yeah.
Right. How did you end
Get
up
in.
playing?
Well,
Yeah.
they got a drummer eventually, or we got a drummer. We tried several. I mean, with some really funny stories about. I don't know if give names particularly because it might just offend.
Don't mention names,
Don't
but,
names.
But
you can say
we tried.
drummer A.
Drummer A, drummer B, drummer C. Drummer C was amusing because he was quite a good drummer actually.
Right, yeah.
And if he ever hears it, Tony Hart. Now he was.
Well, that's his name.
Well, there's a name, but I put it in context.
Yeah.
Is the fact that Tony was 10 years older than me, and I was already bloody old for pop music. But Tony had played with Emil Ford and the Checkmates, and one of his great
They had a
story.
hit, didn't they?
They did. They have several, I think.
Yeah.
But Tony's. His greatest story still kept the band in stitches. They used to not stop because they were sort of rushing around the place. They had other jobs as well. So if they wanted to urinate, for instance, they never stopped the van. They had a can which they pissed in, a fairly large paint can.
Yeah.
And the best story I heard was Tony had just pissed in the can. And obviously the driver doing something had to brake. Yeah. And of course, you know what happens when you get a can full of piss, you brake hard.
Yeah, we always
Well, that was Emil Ford's first real wash in urine. but that was one of Tony's good stories. But Tony was a good drummer. Yeah. But he was also employed, he had a family. And not that I didn't, by the way.
Yeah.
But he couldn't do what the boys wanted to do, go further afield, some gigs, etc., etc. Eventually, the eventuality was that we had been called the Howling Wolves. They'd been called the Roadrunners. I think it was with the Roadrunners. By the way, there were about another 250 Roadrunners, not just in England,
sure,
but in Hampshire, I think, actually. So that was a pretty common name for a band. Yeah. And my brothers once told me, said, it would be bloody good if, in fact, you played, Phil. And I said, well, all I can fairly, I'm an average tootler on a trumpet, and I couldn't really see, there was no place for a 5-piece band at the time, but a trumpet player was nonsense. So they said, oh, no problem, just get a saxophone. Well, of course, it's not just as easy as it sounds. But eventually I did. I got a silver sax. I think it was...
so you hadn't actually picked up a sax before then? Never
in my life, hold on. But it took me about, I suppose, to play riffs with Eric on organ, which wasn't organ, by the way, it was a little Hohner keyboard, in fact, electric piano type thing. And he played that when we'd play riffs behind what we were playing by then, which was a lot of R&B stuff, bits of soul, bits of things which we enjoyed, but very little what you'd call pop music, really. Yeah. It was mainly R&B and soul. And eventually I got sort of proficient at it. But I was then not just managing, I was also, in the band as well, and driving the van. Eventually they did other, but eventually we did actually become what I call a complete band, by employing 2 members of the band who came from a band in Gosport called the Classics. Yeah. And I was sent out one night by my brothers, of course, because they would send me out to do just about anything and everything. To suss them out at a club which we eventually got our own residency at, called the Concord in Southampton. And I saw the Classics play, and quite frankly, Pete and Tony were very what you call very steady players, very much blues background. But I looked at them and I thought, well, they're better than anything else I've seen around, quite frankly. Yeah. So at the end of the gig, very sneakily, I asked them if they'd like to talk to me and chat about another band. I said, have you heard of this particular group? And we were getting the odd line or two, I think, in the local press, various things we're doing. And they said, well, we'll listen and listen to what I proposed. And they joined the band. This was still semi-pro. We weren't fully professional. Yeah. And
the Classics are particularly professional.
No, they weren't. They were semi-pro, but they were very close. I mean, they had been looked at by Joe Meek. I don't know if you heard these names, sort of like close. Yeah. Joe Meek, and they had an agency doing work for them called Len Cannon's agency, Southampton.
So it was
fairly well known. We weren't
a bit of pilfering then.
Yeah, it was a bit of pilfering actually, but they were fine, and they joined us, and we rehearsed together, and we were becoming, by then, Simon Dupri and the Big Sound, name donated by a guy who I know fairly recently I'd seen in the Yellow Pages, was still Asian type. He was still an agent, a bloke called John Bedford. No, he's a gentle geezer, John, but he thought, that the band was fine, but Roadrunners was like a bit ordinary, and he said, let's do something which is connected with Pompey. And of course, the first thing you can think of was like Brickwoods Brewery, and the Dupri family had been like directors of Brickwoods Brewery for a long time.
Brickwoods Big Sound.
That would have been quite... Brig would have been probably better than Simon Dupri, because it was one of those things which, in fact, caused a little bit of... you get edgy with when somebody has to be called something in the band. Simon Dupri was Derek, my brother, because he was the lead singer.
Simon Dupri was in fact a Lord Mayor of Portsmouth.
Well, it was certainly something. Yeah, they'd been mayors of Dupri family mayors in Pompey earlier on. However, that's what we were called.
Yeah.
And John also managed to get us some quite interesting gigs.
Yeah.
I mean, he had strange ideas of where we could go out to, come back the next day, go to work, and go out again.
Yeah.
I mean, he got gigs in Watford, Lewisham. I remember particularly we played a gig at a club called the El Partido Club, which was fairly notorious eventually, not just famous for being owned and housed by people who had been involved with the craze, etc.
Nice.
And I remember we used to get what was called all-nighters, which meant as a teacher I'd be playing all night and getting into the cab about 6 a.m, coming back to Pompey and going straight out to work again, which was a little bit, don't ask me how you did it, because I won't let you into those secrets.
Yeah.
But
Substance free.
not substance. Not I'm not discussing that part of it at all.
Yeah.
But the fact remains that you had to go and do these things if you wanted to play music, and also, if you like, in inverted commas, get on.
Yeah.
That means climb up the ladder a little bit, start challenging for hopefully professionalism, you know.
In instalment 2 of this 3-part series, Phil Shulman will speak about his time with Simon Dupri and the Big Sound, touring, screaming girls, and a little bit of the high life. Until then, good luck, goodbye, and stay tuned to DamonShulman.co.uk.